The crystal caves of Veridia pulsed with an ethereal blue glow, illuminating Oriel's silver-flecked skin as she pressed herself deeper into the narrow crevice. 26 days. 26 rotations of this hostile planet since the emergency evacuation sirens had blared through the Elysian research outpost, and her people had fled in desperate haste. 26 days since she'd been left behind. Oriel ran her six-fingered hand along the rough wall, feeling the vibrations of approaching predators through her sensitive palm ridges. The night crawlers were hunting again. She would need to move deeper into the cave system before their acidic secretions reached her current hideout. "Control your breath," she whispered to herself in the musical language of her people. "Conserve energy, follow the water." Her supply pack had lasted only the first week. Since then, she'd survived on bioluminescent fungi and the sweet water that trickled down from Veridia's ice caps. The water sustained her Elysian physiology, but her strength was fading. Without the specialized nutrients her species required, she would eventually weaken beyond recovery. Oriel gathered her makeshift tools, crystalline shards she'd fashioned into cutting implements, and began her careful descent toward the underground pools. The evacuation had been so sudden. The warning of the solar flare had come with barely enough time for the main vessels to escape. She'd been collecting specimens in the outer fields when the alarm sounded. By the time she reached the landing site, the last transport was disappearing into Veridia's lavender sky. They would return for her. Elysians never abandoned their own, especially not females of childbearing age like herself. But the radiation from the solar event would have disrupted all communication systems. They would need to wait until it was safe. Unless they believed her dead already. The thought sent a wave of despair through her, causing the phosphorescent patterns across her shoulders to dim noticeably. Emotion regulation was crucial to survival, her father had always taught her. Emotions affected an Elysian's biological functions directly. Fear could stop her heart. Despair could shut down her lungs. Hope was not merely psychological, it was physiological necessity. 3 levels down, Oriel reached the underground lake and bent to collect water in her makeshift container. Her reflection rippled across the surface. Large, almond-shaped eyes of deep violet, the characteristic platinum hair of her lineage now matted and dull. The luminous patterns across her face and neck faded from malnutrition. That's when she heard it, not the slithering of night crawlers or the clicking of cave insects, but something heavier, methodical, bipedal. Oriel froze, her respiratory membranes flaring in alarm. Nothing native to Veridia walked on 2 legs except during mating season, and that was months away. A beam of artificial light swept across the cavern entrance above. A voice, deep, unfamiliar in tone and language, echoed through the crystalline chamber. "Hello, is someone down there?" Human, the realization struck her with both terror and desperate hope. Veridia was far from established human space. No human should be here, yet one was. Elysians had strictly limited contact with humans for generations, considering them unpredictable and potentially dangerous. More importantly, interaction between humans and Elysian females was absolutely forbidden by ancient law. But laws seemed distant concerns now, with survival at stake. The light found her. Oriel squinted against its brightness, her pupils contracting to thin slits as she pressed against the cavern wall. Through the glare, she saw a tall figure in an environmental suit, helmet removed to reveal a face unlike any in her experience. Bronzed skin, eyes the color of Veridia's twin moons, and dark hair cropped close to his head. "My God," the human male whispered, lowering his light. You're not from around here, are you?" Oriel's translator implant had been damaged in her desperate flight to the caves. She understood his words but couldn't respond in his language. Instead, she straightened to her full height, still a head shorter than the human, and placed her palm against her chest in the Elysian gesture of peaceful intent. The human slowly mirrored her gesture, his 5-fingered hand splayed across his chest. "Dominic Archer," he said, pointing to himself. "Xenobiologist, I'm here to help." For several heartbeats, they remained frozen in mutual assessment. Oriel's second eyelids blinked rapidly, a sign of her species' heightened alertness. The human Dominic seemed to recognize her distress and slowly lowered himself to a crouching position, making himself appear smaller, less threatening. "I've got food, medical supplies," he said, keeping his voice low and even. He opened a compartment on his suit and withdrew a small silver packet. "Universal nutrients, should be compatible with most carbon-based life forms." The mention of food made Oriel's stomach constrict painfully. Her body's bioluminescence flickered in response, creating ripples of light beneath her translucent outer dermis. The human's eyes widened in fascination. "Incredible," he breathed. "Bioluminescent communication. Are you responding to me?" Cautiously, Oriel extended one hand toward the silver packet, her elongated fingers trembling slightly. The laws of her people echoed in her mind, warnings passed down through generations about the danger of human contact. But starvation was the more immediate threat. As Dominic offered the packet, his scanner device beeped urgently. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. "We need to move," he said sharply. "Something big is coming this way, multiple signatures." Oriel didn't need the translation. She could feel the vibrations intensifying through the soles of her feet. The night crawlers had found a new path down, and they were hungry. With a fluid gesture born of desperation, she seized the human's wrist and pulled him toward a narrow fissure in the rear wall of the cavern, a passage she'd discovered days earlier, but had been too weak to explore. "You want me to follow you?" Dominic asked, but he was already moving with her, his free hand reaching for something at his hip, a weapon, she realized. The sounds behind them grew louder, the distinctive hissing of night crawlers preparing to spray their corrosive hunting secretions. Oriel yanked Dominic into the fissure just as the first acidic burst splashed against the rock where they'd been standing. The passage was tight, forcing them to press close together as they scrambled deeper into the unknown darkness. Dominic's body radiated heat unlike any Elysian's, a strange, almost burning warmth that both alarmed and oddly comforted Oriel as they fled together into the planet's depths. Behind them, the nightcrawler's frustrated shrieks echoed through the caverns, but ahead, Oriel sensed something she hadn't felt in 26 days. A way forward, and perhaps in this strange human a chance at survival. The passage eventually widened into a small chamber illuminated by clusters of bioluminescent fungi clinging to the ceiling. Dominic's breathing was heavy in the confined space, his environmental suit whirring softly as it adjusted to the new surroundings. Oriel kept a careful distance, her violet eyes never leaving him as she pressed her back against the crystalline wall. "I think we're safe here," Dominic said, checking his scanner. "For now." He removed a small device from his belt and placed it on the ground between them. It hummed to life, projecting a soft barrier field around their position, a precaution against whatever might be lurking in the darkness. Oriel's gaze fixed on the silver nutrient packet still clutched in his hand. Dominic followed her eyes and carefully extended it toward her. "You need this more than I do," he said softly. "Your bioluminescence patterns, they're fatting. That indicates metabolic stress in your species, doesn't it?" Surprised by his knowledge, Oriel accepted the packet with trembling fingers. She tore it open and consumed the contents quickly, the universal nutrients spreading warmth through her depleted system. Almost immediately, the luminous patterns across her skin brightened. Dominic watched with undisguised fascination. "Remarkable," he murmured, reaching for a small device on his wrist. "My name is Dominic," he repeated, pointing to himself. Then he pointed to her with a questioning expression. "Oriel," she replied in her musical language, touching her chest. Then, concentrating hard on the few human words she'd learned during her research training, she added, "Oriel, scientist." Dominic's face lit up. "You understand me? Do you have a translator implant? Is it damaged?" He tapped his temple, miming a broken device. Oriel nodded, touching a small indentation behind her ear. "Broken, solar, storm." "That's why you're stranded," Dominic said, the pieces coming together. "Your people evacuated during the solar storm last month, but why would they leave you?" Unable to explain the complexity of the situation with her limited human vocabulary, Oriel instead focused on a more immediate concern. She gestured deeper into the cave system and made a flowing motion with her hands, then pointed to her lips. "Water," Dominic interpreted. "You know where to find water. Good, we'll need it." He hesitated, then reached into his pack and extracted another device, sleeker and more sophisticated than his scanner. "This is a prototype neural interface. It might help us communicate better." Oriel recoiled instinctively. Among her people, mental connections were intimate exchanges, reserved only for family and bondmates. To allow a human into her mind would violate one of her culture's most sacred taboos. Dominic seemed to sense her discomfort. "It's not invasive," he explained, demonstrating by placing the small disk against his own temple. It only translates surface thoughts into language, no deep connection. He removed it and offered it again. I need to understand what happened to help you. Minutes passed as Oriel weighed her options. Finally, survival instinct overcame cultural prohibition. She accepted the device and placed it against her temple, wincing as it adhered to her skin with a gentle pulse. Can you understand me now? Dominic asked. The neural interface hummed, and suddenly his words were clear in her mind. More than clear, they carried nuances of concern, scientific curiosity, and something else: loneliness. Yes, she responded in her native tongue, the device translating for him. I can understand you, but this connection is uncomfortable for my kind. I'll remove it once we've established basic communication, he promised. What happened? How did you get separated from your people? Oriel's luminous patterns rippled with remembered fear. I was collecting botanical samples beyond the settlement perimeter when the evacuation sirens sounded. The solar radiation warning came suddenly. Our scientists miscalculated the star's instability. By the time I returned, the final transport was departing. And they couldn't wait, couldn't do a final head count. There was no time. The radiation surge would have disabled all ships in orbit. It was logical. The words tasted bitter even as she defended her people's choice. They will return for me when it's safe. Dominic's expression revealed skepticism, but he didn't challenge her assertion. How long have you been hiding here? 26 planetary rotations. Almost a month, he translated into his time measurement. You've survived well in an extremely hostile environment. Pride flickered through Oriel's exhaustion. I am a xenobotanist. I know which fungi are safe to consume, which waters carry fewest parasites. She glanced at the shield generator between them. But the predators are growing bolder as food becomes scarce in the upper levels. A low rumbling vibrated through the chamber, sending tiny crystal fragments showering from the ceiling. Dominic's scanner beeped in alarm. Speaking of predators, he muttered, checking the readings. Something large is moving through the main cavern system, serpentine locomotion pattern approximately 12 meters in length. Tunnel grave, Oriel whispered, her skin patterns blanching to a defensive white. A subterranean apex predator, it can sense body heat through solid rock. As if in confirmation, a deep guttural hiss echoed through the passages. Dominic quietly retrieved his weapon, a pulse rifle designed for large predators, and moved closer to Oriel. The shield generator will mask our heat signatures temporarily, he said, but we need a more defensible position. Do you know these cave systems well? Oriel hesitated, then admitted, I have mapped only a small portion, but there is a chamber 3 levels down where hot springs create a thermal mask. The minerals in the water confuse the tunnel grave's senses. Another rumble, closer this time. The tunnel grave was systematically searching the passages. Show me, Dominic said, gathering his equipment. He offered his hand to help her stand, an innocent gesture that nonetheless sent a shock through Oriel's system. Physical contact with non-Elysians was another taboo, particularly for females. Yet she found herself placing her 6-fingered hand in his 5-fingered one, allowing him to pull her to her feet. The contact lasted only seconds, but the warmth of his skin against hers lingered strangely. This way, she said, leading him toward a narrow fissure barely visible in the chamber's far wall. We must move quickly and silently. Its hearing is exceptional. They slipped into the passage just as an enormous serpentine head pushed into the chamber they'd vacated, its eyeless face covered in heat-sensing pits. The creature's frustrated roar shook the entire tunnel system as they descended deeper into Veridia's underground labyrinth. In the dim glow of Dominic's light and her own bioluminescence, Oriel caught him studying her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Curiosity, certainly. He was a scientist after all. But there was something else. Something that made her own patterns shift to colors she rarely displayed. Why are you here? She asked as they navigated the treacherous descent. This planet is far from human space. I'm cataloging exobiological specimens on frontier worlds, he replied, helping her over a particularly steep drop. My research ship detected unusual energy signatures from these caves. I came to investigate. His mouth curved in what she recognized as a human smile. I didn't expect to find someone like you. We are not supposed to meet, Oriel said softly. My people forbid contact between humans and Elysian females. Dominic's eyebrows rose. Why only females? The tunnel grave's roar interrupted before she could answer. They pressed on in silence, each acutely aware of the other's presence in the narrow confines of the passage. Two beings from different worlds, thrown together by circumstance, moving deeper into the unknown. The hot springs chamber glowed with ethereal beauty. Steaming pools of mineral-rich water created prismatic reflections across the crystalline ceiling, bathing everything in shimmering, multicolored light. Dominic whistled softly in appreciation as they entered the vast underground cavern. "This is incredible," he murmured, his scanner indicating they were temporarily safe from pursuit. "The thermal signatures should mask our presence." Oriel nodded, visibly relaxing as she moved toward one of the smaller pools. The chamber had been her sanctuary during the worst days of her isolation. She knelt beside the water, dipping her hands into the warm liquid. Almost immediately, her skin absorbed nutrients through specialized membranes, the bioluminescent patterns across her body glowing more vibrantly in response. "Your species can feed through direct absorption?" Dominic asked, fascinated by the process. "Only supplementary minerals," she explained, the neural interface translating her musical language. "We still require conventional nutrition." She gestured to him. "You should rest. The tunnel grave will hunt for hours before retreating to its den." Dominic settled beside a pool, removing his environmental suit's outer layer to reveal standard expedition clothing beneath. Without the bulky protection, his human form was clearer, tall and lean, his movements possessing an alien grace that Oriel found herself watching with inappropriate interest. "You never answered my question," he said, after drinking from his water container. "Why does your species forbid contact between humans and Elysian females specifically?" Oriel's patterns shifted to a deeper blue, embarrassment though Dominic couldn't know that. "It is complex. Our females are biologically valuable, rare. Elysian males outnumber females nearly 3-to-1, and we are susceptible to certain types of bonds. Bonds, psychic imprinting, when we choose mates." Her patterns swirled in discomfort at discussing such intimate matters with an outsider. "The Council of Elders fears that human males might unintentionally trigger imprinting responses in unpaired females, creating bonds that would be inappropriate." "Is that actually possible?" Dominic asked, his scientific curiosity evident. "There were incidents generations ago during the early contact period. The Elders implemented the separation protocols afterward." She changed the subject quickly. "Your scanner, can it detect Elysian technology? Our evacuation ships would have left a communication beacon at the central spire." Dominic paused, sensing her discomfort. "Possibly. How far is this central spire?" 300 kilometers northeast, through the Crimson Plains and the Whispering Forest." He whistled. "That's a significant journey on foot through unknown terrain." "You have a better suggestion?" There was a hint of challenge in her tone. "Actually, I do," Dominic smiled. "My research shuttle is parked about 20 kilometers from here. If we can reach it, we could cover that distance in hours instead of weeks." Hope flickered across Oriel's features. "You would help me reach the beacon? Why?" "Why wouldn't I? You're stranded. I'm in a position to help." He shrugged as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "Besides, I've never encountered an Elysian before. The xenobiologist in me is fascinated." Oriel studied him, her head tilted in a gesture that appeared both curious and wary. "My people say humans are unpredictable, dangerous." "Sometimes we are," Dominic admitted with surprising honesty. "But not to you, not now." They held each other's gaze for a long moment. Something passed between them, a current of understanding that transcended their biological differences. Oriel was the first to look away, her skin patterns shifting to colors she rarely displayed in the presence of others. "We should depart at first light," she said. "The surface predators are less active during daylight hours." Dominic nodded. "Get some rest, I'll take first watch." The night cycle passed peacefully. They took turns sleeping while the other maintained vigilance, though the tunnel grave never found their thermal sanctuary. In the artificial morning created by Veridia's distant sun filtering through crystal formations in the cave's ceiling, they prepared to leave. Oriel led the way through a series of ascending passages, her knowledge of the underground system proving invaluable. By midday, they emerged onto the planet's surface, blinking in the bright purple light of Viridia's primary star. The landscape that greeted them was both beautiful and forbidding. Rolling hills covered in iridescent vegetation stretched toward the horizon, where the jagged peaks of distant mountains tore at the lavender sky. Strange, bird-like creatures soared on thermal currents, their wingspan easily 10 meters across. Sky hunters, Oriel identified them. Mostly carrion feeders, but they'll attack if they sense weakness. Friendly place, Dominic commented dryly, checking his location beacon. The shuttle's that way about 18 kilometers through those foothills. They set off across the alien terrain, alert for danger. The journey required them to move carefully, often hiding from various predators or waiting for toxic spore clouds to dissipate. Conversation flowed more naturally as they walked, the shared purpose easing initial tensions. "How long have you been a xenobiologist?" Oriel asked as they navigated a particularly dense section of razor grass. 7 Earth years, Dominic replied. Before that, I was in xenoanthropology studying sentient species rather than flora and fauna, but I found I preferred working alone. A shadow crossed his features. People are complicated. All sentient life is complicated, Oriel observed. Dominic smiled at that. True enough, what about you? Always been a xenobotanist? No, I was training as a cultural liaison before the Resource Council reassigned me. My empathic sensitivity made me too. She searched for the right word. Vulnerable for diplomatic work. Empathic, you can sense emotions. Only with physical contact, she clarified. It's considered intrusive to use such abilities in diplomatic settings. Dominic nodded thoughtfully. That explains your reaction when I offered my hand back in the cave. Before Oriel could respond, a high-pitched shriek split the air. They looked up to see 3 sky hunters circling lower, their keen senses having detected the travelers. Run, Dominic ordered, grabbing her hand without thinking. The shuttle's just beyond that ridge. They sprinted across the open ground, the sky hunters diving in coordinated attack patterns. Oriel gasped as one swooped close enough for its talons to graze her shoulder, tearing her protective clothing. Dominic fired his pulse rifle, not aiming to kill but to deter. The birds shrieked in irritation, circling higher but not abandoning the hunt. There, Dominic pointed to a sleek vessel nestled in a small clearing. Another 200 meters. They made the final dash as the sky hunters dove again. Dominic slapped his hand against the hull scanner, and the shuttle's entry ramp descended with agonizing slowness. They tumbled inside just as the largest hunter crashed against the closing hatch, its frustrated scream echoing through the shuttle's interior. Breathing hard, they collapsed against the inner bulkhead. Only then did Oriel realize they were still holding hands, her 6 fingers intertwined with his 5. More alarmingly, the physical contact had triggered her empathic abilities, Dominic's emotions washing through her in powerful waves. Relief, excitement, concern for her safety, and something deeper, more primal that made her own patterns shift to a brilliant magenta. She pulled away abruptly, breaking the connection. "You're injured," Dominic said, noticing the tear in her clothing and the silvery fluid seeping from the wound beneath. "It's minor," she assured him, though the pain was significant. Dominic moved to the shuttle's medical cabinet. "Let me help, please." After a hesitant moment, Oriel nodded, allowing him to treat the injury. As his fingers gently applied healing gel to her torn skin, neither mentioned the strange current that seemed to flow between them, a connection that defied both biology and cultural taboos. The research shuttle hummed with quiet efficiency as it soared over Viridia's spectacular landscape. Oriel stood transfixed at the viewport, watching the terrain she had only previously studied from ground level. The crimson plains sprawled beneath them, vast stretches of rust-colored vegetation that undulated like an ocean in Viridia's constant winds. Beyond them loomed the whispering forest, its towering silver-leafed trees reaching hundreds of meters into the sky. "It's beautiful from up here," she murmured. "Deadly but beautiful." Dominic glanced at her from the pilot's seat, struck by the way Viridia's lavender sunlight illuminated her alien features. The silver flecks in her skin caught the light, creating patterns that shifted with her every movement. He'd encountered countless species in his work, but none had affected him quite like this Elysian xenobotanist. "We'll reach the central spire in about 40 minutes, he said, redirecting his thoughts to their mission. "My scanners are already picking up artificial structures. This was your people's main research station." Oriel nodded. Established 22 standard cycles ago, the central spire houses the main communication array and emergency protocols. Her patterns dimmed slightly. If my people left a beacon, it will be there. And if they didn't? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable but necessary. Then I must accept that they believe me lost. Her voice remained steady, but the flickering patterns across her neck betrayed her distress. Dominic hesitated, then asked what had been bothering him since their escape from the caves. This empathic ability of yours. When we were holding hands during our escape, what did you feel? Oriel stiffened, her secondary eyelids flickering rapidly, a sign of agitation he'd come to recognize. It would be inappropriate to discuss. Among my people, empathic readings are considered deeply private. I understand, He adjusted the shuttle's course slightly, avoiding turbulence. I want to make sure I didn't project anything that caused you discomfort. After a long pause, Oriel spoke softly. Your emotions were intense concern, protection. She turned to face the viewport again. Attraction. The word hung between them like a physical presence. I apologize if that made you uncomfortable, Dominic said carefully. Your feelings are your own, she replied. But you should understand what such connections mean to Elysians. Physical and emotional bonds are not casual matters for us. They can become permanent. The imprinting you mentioned. She nodded. With sufficient emotional resonance and prolonged physical contact, an Elysian female can form a lifelong neurochemical bond. It is why the Council forbids such interactions with other species. The consequences would be significant. What kind of consequences? Exile, she said simply, permanent separation from the collective. Dominic absorbed this information solemnly. I'll be more careful with physical contact. The central spire came into view, breaking their tense conversation. It rose majestically from the edge of the whispering forest, a gleaming tower of alien architecture that spiraled toward the sky like a frozen silver tornado. Even in its abandoned state, the structure conveyed the advanced engineering of Elysian civilization. There, Oriel pointed, her professional demeanor returning. The landing platform on the eastern face. Dominic guided the shuttle into a smooth landing. As the engines powered down, he activated the external environment scanners. Atmosphere reads as safe, but there's a storm system approaching from the northwest. Could be dangerous if we're still here when it hits. They disembarked, Oriel moving with reverent familiarity across the abandoned platform. 26 days had left a layer of Viridia's red dust across everything, but the station's self-maintaining systems had prevented major deterioration. The communication center is on the uppermost level, she explained, leading him toward a spiral entrance. As they passed through the automated decontamination field, the station's auxiliary power systems recognized Oriel's biological signature and activated, bringing soft ambient lighting to life around them. Welcome, researcher Oriel, an artificial voice greeted in the musical Elysian language. Warning, emergency protocols active, full systems restart not recommended. Acknowledge warnings, limited power to communication array only, Oriel responded. She glanced at Dominic. The station AI is still functional, a good sign. They ascended through the spiral structure, passing laboratories and living quarters left in various states of hurried abandonment. Dominic noticed Oriel pausing at one particular chamber. Her quarters, he assumed, from the personal items still visible through the transparent door. Do you want to collect anything? He asked gently. She shook her head. There will be time if the beacon works, but her longing glance spoke volumes. The communication center occupied the spire's uppermost level, a circular chamber dominated by a central control console surrounded by panoramic viewports. Oriel immediately moved to the main terminal, her six-fingered hands dancing across the familiar interface. The emergency beacon was deployed, she confirmed, relief evident in her voice and bioluminescent patterns. But her patterns dimmed. The transmission power is inadequate. The solar radiation damaged the main amplifier. Dominic joined her at the console, examining the diagnostic readouts. Can it be repaired? Possibly, we would need to reconfigure the auxiliary power couplings to boost the signal strength. She pointed to a panel near the floor. The maintenance conduits should contain the necessary components. They worked together for hours, Dominic following Oriel's instructions as they rewired the complex alien technology. Their fingers brushed occasionally, each contact sending a jolt of awareness through both of them that neither acknowledged. Outside, the storm Dominic had detected approached rapidly. Fierce winds battered the spire, and purple lightning illuminated the darkening sky. The structure, though built to withstand Veridia's harsh environment, groaned under the assault. "We need to activate it now," Oriel said as she made the final connections. "The storm will only worsen." Dominic sealed the access panel. "Will it reach your people?" "If they're monitoring emergency channels, yes." She initiated the sequence, and the console hummed to life. "The message includes our coordinates and my identification code. Now we wait." A violent gust rocked the spire, and the lights flickered ominously. The station AI's voice echoed through the chamber. "Warning, structural integrity compromised in sectors 7 through 12. Emergency shelter protocols advised." "We need to move to a more secure location," Oriel said, leading Dominic toward a small chamber adjacent to the communication center. "The storm shelters are designed to withstand even Veridia's worst weather." The shelter was little more than a reinforced room with basic survival supplies, but it offered protection from the raging storm. As the door sealed behind them, the external sounds muffled to a distant roar. The space was intimate, clearly designed for a maximum of 2 Elysian researchers in emergency situations. "How long will the storm last?" Dominic asked as they settled into the confined space. "Veridia's weather patterns are unpredictable. Hours, perhaps a full-day cycle." Oriel activated the shelter's independent power supply, providing soft illumination and climate control. They sat opposite each other on narrow benches, the silence between them filled with unspoken tension. Outside, the storm raged, effectively cutting them off from the rest of the world. "Thank you," Oriel said suddenly, "for helping me. You had no obligation to risk your safety for a stranded alien." Dominic smiled. "I think we've moved past alien at this point. At least I hope we have." "What would you call us then?" she asked, her patterns shifting to a color he hadn't seen before, a soft, pulsing rose shade. "Friends at minimum," he replied. Then, with careful deliberation, "But I think we both know there's something more happening here." Oriel's secondary eyelids flickered rapidly. "Dominic, I cannot." "I understand the taboos," he interrupted gently. "And I respect them. But we're alone on a planet billions of kilometers from either of our civilizations. Does it matter here what your council or my research ethics committee would say?" A particularly violent thunderclap shook the shelter, as if punctuating his question. In the momentary power fluctuation that followed, Oriel's bioluminescence was the only light in the room, casting ethereal patterns across both their faces. "It matters because I must eventually return to my people," she said softly. "And if I form certain types of bonds, that return becomes complicated." "What if you had a choice?" Dominic asked, moving to sit beside her. "What would you choose if there were no consequences?" Oriel's gaze met his, her alien eyes filled with emotions that transcended species. "That is not our reality." "It could be," he suggested, his voice barely audible above the storm. "There are places, frontier worlds, independent colonies, where both our kinds live together without such restrictions." "You would suggest I abandon my civilization, my family?" "No," he said quickly. "I'm suggesting that when your people come for you, you consider all possibilities before making a decision." Another silence fell between them, charged with potential. Slowly, deliberately, Oriel extended her hand, palm up, an unmistakable invitation. Dominic hesitated, understanding the significance. "Are you sure?" "No," she admitted, "but I want to know before they come, before choices must be made." He placed his hand in hers, their fingers intertwining. The empathic connection flowered between them, human emotions meeting Elysian consciousness in a rush that made both gasp. Dominic felt a strange sensation, as if parts of his mind previously closed were suddenly opening, while Oriel experienced the full force of his feelings without filter or restraint. "I see you," she whispered in her native tongue, though she knew he would understand her meaning if not her words. Outside, the storm raged on, but within the shelter, 2 beings from different worlds found themselves crossing boundaries neither had believed possible. Dawn broke over Veridia, the storm having passed during the night cycle. Golden-purple light filtered through the shelter's small viewport, illuminating Auriel and Dominic as they sat together, their hands still loosely intertwined. Neither had spoken for hours, yet silence had never felt so eloquent. The empathic connection had stabilized into something both profound and terrifying, a bridge between minds never meant to touch. Through it, Auriel had experienced the entirety of Dominic's existence, his solitary childhood on Mars' colony, his years of academic isolation, the quiet loneliness that had driven him to the stars. And he, in turn, had glimpsed her world, the rigid hierarchies of Elysian society, the weight of expectations placed upon rare females, her secret yearning for something beyond predestined paths. "Is it always like this?" Dominic finally asked, his voice husky from disuse. "This connection?" "No," Auriel replied, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with colors she'd never displayed before, deep crimson and gold intertwined. "This is unprecedented. Our biologies are different, yet somehow compatible on fundamental levels." She met his gaze directly. "The imprinting has begun, not complete, but initiated." The implications hung between them. According to everything she'd told him, such bonds were irreversible among her kind. "Do you regret it?" he asked. She considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. "I should. Everything I've been taught tells me I should." Her patterns shifted to a resolute blue. "But I don't." The shelter's communication panel chimed softly, interrupting their moment of honesty. Auriel moved to the console, her expression transforming as she read the incoming transmission. "They received our signal," she whispered, joy and apprehension mingling in her voice. "An Elysian research vessel has altered course to retrieve me. Estimated arrival, 14 hours. Dominic felt a complex wave of emotions, relief for her safety, yet profound sadness at what it meant. "That's good news," he said, forcing conviction into his tone. "Is it?" She turned to face him, her alien features more dear to him now than any human countenance had ever been. "The imprinting process has already begun, Dominic. When they examine me, they will know." "Can it be reversed?" "No, once initiated, the neurochemical changes are permanent." "Then what happens?" Auriel moved to the viewport, gazing out at Veridia's wild beauty. "Best case, rehabilitation and reassignment to isolated research. Worst case, exile." Her voice grew softer. "The Council fears contamination of bloodlines of culture." Dominic joined her at the viewport, careful not to touch her, though everything in him yearned to. "You have options. You could." "What, stay here, live as an exile among humans? Neither world would truly accept what we are to each other." She closed her eyes briefly. "The irony is perfect. I waited 26 days for rescue, only to find that rescue might now be my undoing." They exited the shelter to find the central spire largely intact despite the storm's fury. The communication array continued transmitting the beacon signal, counting down the hours until the Elysian vessel's arrival. As they made their way down to the main level, Auriel stopped at her former living quarters. The door slid open at her biological signature, revealing a space that perfectly captured the essence of its occupant. Meticulously organized, yet filled with botanical specimens and cultural artifacts from a dozen worlds. "I'd like to collect some personal items," she said, entering the chamber. Dominic remained respectfully at the threshold as she gathered a few small objects. A crystalline memory device, a preserved specimen of some exotic plant, and what appeared to be a family heirloom. "My father's service medallion," she explained, noticing his interest in the intricate silver disc. "He was one of our greatest explorers. He believed in building bridges between species, not walls." Her patterns rippled with melancholy. "His views fell out of favor after the Council's conservative faction took control." "He sounds like someone I would have respected," Dominic said. "He would have liked you." She tucked the medallion into a secure pocket. "He died believing our isolation was a mistake." They spent the remaining hours exploring the abandoned research station, Auriel explaining the various experiments her people had conducted on Veridia. The tension of their situation remained, but alongside it grew a deepening appreciation for these final moments together. As the countdown reached its final hour, they returned to the landing platform where Dominic's shuttle remained docked. The sky above had cleared to a perfect lavender expanse, making it easy to spot the approaching vessel, a sleek, silver craft that seemed to bend light around its elegant hull. "Elysian design hasn't changed much in 20 years, Dominic observed, professional admiration momentarily overriding personal concerns. We value tradition, Oriel replied, her gaze fixed on the approaching ship. Her patterns had shifted to formal configurations, cool blues and whites that masked her true emotional state. She was preparing herself, he realized, donning the cultural armor she would need to face her people. Oriel, he began, sensing time slipping away. Whatever you decide, I want you to know. Don't, she interrupted gently. Please, not yet. The Elysian vessel descended with silent efficiency, settling onto the platform 50 meters from them. Its hull bore the insignia of the Science Directorate, 3 interlocking spirals surrounding a central star. The entry portal dilated, and 3 figures emerged. Even at a distance, Dominic could see they were all male, taller than Oriel, with similar silver-flecked skin but more angular features and austere patterning. They wore what appeared to be formal uniforms, midnight blue with silver embellishments denoting rank. Senior Researcher Naleth, Oriel identified the central figure, her voice carefully neutral. Research Director for the Outer Worlds Initiative. As the Elysians approached, their expressions revealed varying degrees of shock at seeing Dominic standing beside their recovered kinswoman. The leader, Naleth, stopped several paces away, addressing Oriel in their musical language while pointedly ignoring the human's presence. The neural interface allowed Dominic to understand the exchange. Researcher Oriel, your survival is most unexpected, Naleth said, his tone formal but undeniably pleased. The evacuation records indicated all personnel were accounted for. An error in the accounting, she replied with equal formality. I was collecting samples beyond the perimeter when the alert sounded. Naleth's gaze shifted briefly to Dominic, his bioluminescent patterns displaying what Dominic now recognized as suspicion and concern. You appear to have encountered human assistance. This is Dominic Archer, xenobiologist, Oriel confirmed. He found me in the crystal caves and helped me reach the central spire to activate the beacon. One of the other Elysians stepped forward, activating a scanning device. Director, protocol requires immediate medical evaluation of any female who has had prolonged contact with non-Elysian species. Dominic tensed, knowing what they would discover. Oriel stood perfectly still, her patterns betraying nothing as the scanner hummed around her. The scanner operator's patterns flashed with alarm. Director, the preliminary readings indicate neurochemical abnormalities consistent with early-phase imprinting. Naleth's patterns darkened dramatically. Impossible. The human has been on the planet less than 3 days. 4, Dominic corrected, speaking their language through the neural interface. All 3 Elysians startled at his use of their tongue. We've been in close proximity for 4 days. You will not address us directly, the 3rd Elysian snapped, his patterns flaring aggressively. Enough, Naleth commanded. He turned to Oriel, his expression grave. Is this true? Has contact with this human triggered imprinting? Oriel's chin lifted slightly, a gesture of defiance Dominic had not seen before. The process has begun, yes. It was my choice to initiate contact. A tense silence followed this admission. Naleth's patterns shifted through a series of colors reflecting complex emotions: shock, disappointment, concern, and something that might have been compassion. You understand the protocols, he said finally. The Council has been clear. Any female exhibiting cross-species imprinting must undergo immediate quarantine and rehabilitation. He gestured toward the ship. Come, we must depart before the radiation window closes. Oriel remained motionless, and if I refuse? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. The other Elysians exchanged alarmed glances, but Naleth's expression softened unexpectedly. Oriel, think carefully, he said, his tone gentler. This connection is new. The rehabilitation process has been refined. There is every chance you could return to normal function within a standard cycle. Normal function, she echoed. You mean isolation from my own kind, restricted to laboratory work on abandoned outposts? Her patterns shifted to colors of determination. That is not living, Naleth. That is existence without purpose. The alternative is exile, Naleth warned. Permanent separation from the collective, never to return to Elysia or any of our colonies. Dominic stepped forward despite the warning looks from the other Elysians. There's another option, he said. The human frontier worlds, there are places where differences are valued, not feared. Silence, human, the aggressive Elysian demanded. This is not your concern. It became my concern when your people abandoned her on a hostile world, Dominic replied sharply. And it's definitely my concern now that we've formed a connection your science clearly shows is legitimate. Naleth raised a hand for calm. The human is correct about one thing. There are settlements where exiles have established communities. His gaze returned to Oriel. Your father spoke of them often in council debates. My father, Oriel whispered, her hand moving to the medallion in her pocket. He would be proud of your courage, Naleth said unexpectedly. He challenged our isolation policies until his final days. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. There is a settlement on Proxima Delta, Elysian exiles, humans, and a dozen other species living in cooperation, not officially sanctioned, but tolerated. Oriel's patterns pulsed with surprise. You would suggest such a place. I suggest nothing, Naleth replied carefully. I merely provide information that might be relevant to your decision. He glanced at Dominic. The imprinting process once begun cannot be reversed, but it can be completed, strengthened, with the right conditions. Understanding dawned in Oriel's expression. You knew my father well. I was his student before the council changed course. Naleth straightened, his official demeanor returning. Researcher Oriel, I must formally ask your intentions. Will you return with us to undergo the prescribed protocols? Time seemed to stop as Oriel stood at the fulcrum of her existence. Behind her lay everything she had known, her people, her culture, her predetermined path. Before her stretched an unknown future alongside a being from another world. Both choices carried profound loss and potential. She turned to Dominic, her violet eyes meeting his. What would life be like on these frontier worlds? Challenging, he answered honestly. Sometimes dangerous, but free. No councils dictating who you can bond with, no predetermined paths. He hesitated, then added, and I would be with you, however you would have me. Oriel closed her eyes briefly, her patterns swirling with the complexity of her emotions. When she opened them again, decision had crystallized into certainty. I choose a new path, she said, stepping toward Dominic. Not Elysian, not human, something between the stars. Naleth nodded solemnly. Then by the authority of the Science Directorate, I record your choice as voluntary exile. His formal tone softened. The settlement coordinates will be transmitted to your companion's vessel. Almost imperceptibly, he added, your father would understand. The other Elysians registered varying degrees of shock and disapproval, but deferred to Naleth's authority. With ritual precision, they presented Oriel with a small container, emergency supplies and cultural artifacts to ease her transition. The radiation window closes in 30 minutes, Naleth informed them. Both vessels should depart before then. As the Elysians returned to their ship, Dominic turned to Oriel. Are you certain this is permanent? Her patterns shifted to the deep crimson and gold he now recognized as her emotional signature for him alone. Some choices remake us entirely, she said. This has remade me in ways I am only beginning to understand. She reached for his hand, completing the circuit between them once more. I choose this new constellation of possibilities. Above them, the Elysian vessel rose silently into Veridia's lavender sky, a civilization retreating from the unprecedented. Beside it, a small human shuttle prepared for departure, carrying two beings toward an uncertain future among the stars. Within that shuttle, boundaries continued to dissolve, not erasing their essential differences, but weaving them into something neither species had imagined possible. A bridge between worlds, a choice among stars.